Well, it's finally out. The Mavic 3 is here. What do we think? We've seen the specs, we've seen the pricing, we know what it can do, or at least we think we know what it can do. Where do we go from here? So I'd like to spend a little time talking about the Mavic 3, comparing it to the Mavic 2 Pro, and seeing where we go from here. So stick around, I'll give you my thoughts on it. So what I want to do here is hit the highlights. If you want all the specifics, you can go to DJI's website and get all the detail you want there. But let's look at the major categories. First of all, we've got weight. All right, these are very similar. If you look at the Mavic 2 Pro, it comes in at about 2 pounds, Mavic 3 at about 1.97. Now this is comparing the Pro to the non-center version of the Mavic 3. But the headline, of course, is flight time. Mavic 2 Pro, we've got 31 minutes. Mavic 3, we've got 46 minutes. That's a pretty incredible jump in time. Now, is that important to us? Let's spend some time thinking about that. Right now, on a Mavic 2 Pro with a 31-minute flight time, sometimes I will use one battery to scout an area, come back, change it out, use a second battery to actually fly and film. So a 46-minute time may keep me from having to do that. So that may be a benefit. So I'll give a plus to the Mavic 3 on that. In terms of range, we've got 11 miles on the Mavic 2 Pro and over 18 miles on the Mavic 3. Now, while that's not terribly important in terms of actually flying that distance, it does make a big deal in terms of quality of transmission back to the control station. So I think that's a plus. Top speed's kind of interesting. We've actually lost a little bit between the Mavic 2 and the Mavic 3. Mavic 2 Pro comes in at 44.7, Mavic 3 at 42.5. Now I think obstacle avoidance is kind of interesting here. They say the Mavic 2 Pro has omnidirectional, while the Mavic 3 has 360 degree. I know this is in direct response to the Skydio 2. I mean, right now, the Skydio 2 is the best out there in terms of being fully autonomous and following you anywhere. And I know I've looked at a lot of the other videos from some of the other YouTubers, and they don't mention the Skydio 2. And that could be some sort of an agreement with the fact they're provided with a Mavic 3 to test. So it'd be interesting to see a head-to-head comparison on this and see which is better, whether it's the Skydio 2 or this 360-degree obstacle avoidance on the Mavic 3. So time will tell on that. Now, what about the app? Well, we use the Go 4 app on the Mavic 2 Pro, and that's always been my favorite. I feel like it's much more customizable than the Fly app, which they're using on the Mavic 3. Maybe they'll improve that, maybe not. I don't particularly care for that. Then, of course, moving on to the camera and camera sensor size, Mavic 2 Pro has a 1-inch sensor, which is good, but the Mavic 3 has moved up to a micro 4/3. Obviously a bigger sensor, more space, more data, that is an improvement. If we look at video capabilities on the Mavic 2 Pro, maximum we can get is 4K 30 frames per second or HD at 120 frames per second. Now with the Mavic 3, they're telling us we can get 4K 120 frames per second or HD 200 frames per second. Unfortunately though, if you bought the Mavic 3 today, you wouldn't get that. That's apparently going to be available in a January 2022 upgrade. So that's a little disappointing. What about Active Track? Well, they've improved Active Track. We had 2.0 in the Mavic 2 Pro, upgrading to 5.0 in the Mavic 3. But guess what? Yep, January again, firmware updates, so we don't have that right now. How about autonomous flight modes and some of the fancy modes we get? They're available in the Mavic 2 Pro and theoretically available in the Mavic 3, except it's going to be January before we get those. How about APAS? 2.0 in the Mavic 2 Pro, 5.0 in the Mavic 3. Again, not available until January. Now on to 4G. Now I think this one's hysterical. We don't have 4G capabilities on the Mavic 2 Pro, but supposedly January again of 2022, we're going to have 4G available on the Mavic 3. But what's interesting about it is if you look at their promos, it's a big module that straps onto the back of the drone. Well, that's got to affect flight time, and it certainly is an afterthought. So I think they were caught sleeping here because if you remember in my review of the Parrot Anafi AI, it had 4G built in, which gave it basically unlimited range. So I think the DJI was kind of sleeping on this one and added this on just to compete with the Anafi on that. So I think that's kind of funny. How about transmission? Well, the Mavic 2 Pro used OcuSync 2 and the Mavic 3 OcuSync 3 Plus. That's why we get the greater range on that. So that's a plus there. So there you have it. A lot of money, a lot of drone, but do we need it? I'd like you to think for a second, go back to why you bought a drone in the first place. What's your goal in doing that? Well, my goal is to get good pictures and good videography. But the thing that I keep in mind is that most of the video work I do on my drone is basically B-roll. I'm not looking for my fancy A-roll. I've got my Panasonic GH5 and other cameras, high-quality cinema lenses, to get the kind of high-quality ground shots I want. And I never see a drone being much more than B-roll quality. So, why would we want to upgrade to a Micro Four Thirds format? Here's a bigger sensor. The lens is still kind of mediocre. We don't have interchangeable lenses. Maybe this is not what we want to do. So spend a little time thinking about that. Is that really what we need? Is that what we want? I can tell you from my standpoint, yes, I will probably buy a Mavic 3, but I'm going to wait about 6 months. I want all the bugs to be worked out, the firmware updates, any issues they had with it. Think about the Action 2 that just came out, the little small portable action camera they got. A lot of overheating issues. What if the Mavic 3 has that kind of problem? I know my Skydio 2 does, so I want to wait for those kind of things to shake out. But down the road somewhere, I will buy one, simply because I want to include it in the class so our students can see it. But from a personal standpoint, do I need it? I still really like my Mavic 2 Pro. I'm learning to love my Air 2S, so it's a hard question. So I hope you're still enjoying these videos. If you are, please give me a big thumbs up, subscribe down below, and if you feel like sharing it with your friends, please do so. That would be greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you so much for watching.